Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to a not so random review of Masaki Kobayashi's Human Condition trilogy. I wasn't going to do a video on it, but then talking to Nazrin Prod while we were doing our latest Bergman video on Ronin Nazrin Talks, which I'll leave a link to, where we talk about To Joy and Shame. Check that out if you're interested. I kind of thought, okay, I will do a video on it. Obviously, Isaac Dunn and SGS Films, who are from the Folgers and Ashes podcast, will be happy to know that I finally watched it. Obviously the contrarian in me, part of me wanted to go, oh yeah, it's okay. But it's far from being okay. It is one of those films that you can definitely say is a masterpiece, without any qualification. Obviously it's quite an intimidating film looking at it from the outside. It's over 9 hours long, but it's in 3 parts if you watch it the international cut. I watched the Japanese version, so it's 6 parts, which makes it a lot more digestible. But the fact of the matter is, once you actually get into the story, and once you are introduced to the central character, Kaji, played by Tatsuro Nakadai, you're riveted, and you can watch it pretty quickly, really. And because it's so well crafted and so well done, the running time actually flies by. So even though it is kind of intimidating to go, it's a over 9 hour long film, it really doesn't seem like that once it actually gets going, once you get into it. So this is a special edition Arrow Academy, which feels so good. Obviously you get a booklet. So you have part 1, which is No Greater Love, but in the Japanese version it's No Greater Love and Fury. Part 2 is Road to Eternity, or in the Japanese version it's Nostalgia and The Fog of War. And then part 3 is Soldier's Prayer, or in the Japanese parts it's Escaping Death and Wandering in the Wilderness. I mean, you might think, obviously it's billed as a war film, but it does take a while to actually have Kaji in a war. This was based on a 6-part book by Junpei Gomikawa. Again, apologies for any Japanese viewers. And Kobayashi really felt an affinity to the book, because it's about a soldier who doesn't really want to be a soldier being sent to Manchuria to fight, and that's where Kobayashi actually served his military service. And again, Kobayashi was very politically to the left, which just kind of put him into a bit of bother with Shijuku Studios. He started off essentially making family comedies and family dramas, but then it would be interspersed with political films about prostitution or about, darker subjects, which kind of slightly irritated the studios. And then when he made The Human Condition, 1959 to 1961, because it was such a smash hit, it meant he could later do Harakiri with Nakadai as well, and then Kwaidan later. My favourite Japanese filmmaker is Akira Kurosawa. Always has been and probably always will be. But Kobayashi, despite the fact he didn't make that many films, or all of his films aren't actually available, he only made about 17. But obviously some of the films that he made are straight up masterpieces. Also have to say something about Tazu Nakadai. I'll admit I am biased towards Mifune and Takeshi Shimura, and perhaps I've never given Nakadai the props he deserves. Obviously I love him in Sword of Doom and Harakiri, but he's absolutely amazing in this. He is one of the great protagonists, one of the great characters in cinema history, is Kaji. You can't take your eyes off him. He has those amazing eyes, those amazing cheekbones, and his transformation in this film, from fresh-faced youth and idealism to getting hairier and hairier and thinner, and more disillusioned as the film goes on. It is one of the great performances, not only in Japanese cinema or world cinema or just cinema. It's just an astounding performance. Hard to believe that he was a shop assistant before Kobayashi kind of found him and put him in one of his earlier films. 1957 film, I think. So this was before, obviously, he would appear in Yojimbo as Mifune's nemesis, because he's got a gun. It also stars Michio Aratama as his wife, Michiko, because at the start of the film he doesn't really want to marry her because he could be enlisted, but eventually relents. She gives a great performance, even though it's a fairly thankless role, really. She's only in it for a certain amount of the film. I'll kind of just go a brief plot synopsis because I'm not going to go into every detail. You should just watch it and experience it, and don't be stupid like me and have it sitting on your shelf for a long time before you actually watch it. But again, the over 9 hour running time sometimes can be a little bit intimidating, but because you can break it down into either 3 parts or 6 parts, it makes it a lot more palatable than saying it's one 9 hour film. So we start with Kaji, again unsure of marriage because he doesn't want to be enlisted and then leave his wife. But he works for a mining company. He finds a loophole that if he goes to Manchuria and this mining company, he'll get out of being enlisted. So he and his wife go there. Unfortunately, there's forced labour, Chinese prisoners. So Kaji, who believes in socialism and believes in treating people fairly, he has issues with how the mine is run, how they're treating the prisoners, and it kind of sets up what Kaji goes through throughout the whole trilogy, as far as he tries to do the right thing but he's kind of disliked by both sides. So the Chinese forced labour view him as the enemy, the evil Japanese master. His Japanese colleagues view him as a communist and a red and somebody not to be trusted. And again, this is repeated throughout the trilogy. So wherever he goes, he's continually battling two sides at once rather than just one side. And he's also battling himself, trying to do the right thing. Because I think it wouldn't be as great a film if he was this saint and he always did everything right and just... I mean, Kaji makes mistakes, like we all do. I mean, we all want to be like Kaji. We all want to do the right thing. But sometimes you just can't do the right thing. Or you have to make decisions that are going to hurt somebody. And it's just a matter of prioritising who you hurt. I mean, obviously Kobayashi immediately responded to the character of Kaji, because Kobayashi himself didn't want to go to war. Kobayashi believed in socialism and communism to some extent. But there are moments in the film where, you know, Kaji believes that communism is the greatest thing in the world, and, you know, the Russian army will be different and they'll treat people, you know, like human beings. But obviously history tells us that any ism, whether it's capitalism or communism or whatever ism, doesn't work. Doesn't work in its extreme form. And that's kind of the overall message, as well as no matter what your beliefs are, no matter what your morals are, war will destroy those beliefs and war will destroy those morals. War will make you do things that you never thought you would ever do. It forces you to go places and do things that you just never would comprehend. So you can try and be a pacifist, you can try and, you know, have your beliefs, but war will pervert them and make you and change you and destroy you, basically. It's a happy-go-lucky tale. So he causes problems at the mining. Again, I'm not going to go into details. You need to watch this as cold as possible. Apart from anything else, it's impossible to go into every detail of a 9-hour film. I would be here all day. I think that was one of the other things reason I wanted to do the video eventually, is because I'd probably forget half of it. A lot of it I'll never forget. I'm planning to watch it again relatively soon, because there are things that just stick in your mind, like all great cinema. But again, because he has annoyed the company, they actually put him in. They take away the loophole, so he ends up getting enlisted, which means he has to leave his wife. There's a wonderful scene at the end where they're both on two separate hills, which is obviously symbolic. So he ends up going to boot camp, and I'm sure Kubrick must have seen The Human Condition, because there's a lot of Full Metal Jacket, certainly the first half of Full Metal Jacket, in The Human Condition. So again, I should say, kind of in every place he goes, he does find an ally. It's not just him completely alone. He usually finds an ally. How long they last or what happens to them is a different story, but usually at each kind of stop he makes in his journey, he does find somebody that kind of understands him, as well as obviously plenty of people who don't understand Obviously Kobayashi is challenging the Japanese mentality, the militarism, which again he would question the feudal militarism in Harakiri to devastating effect. But obviously in this one it's the Japanese militarism in World War II and the mentality that Kobayashi is attacking. Obviously it was controversial when the film came out in 1959. Same way Harakiri was controversial. And it's a far cry from family dramas and family comedies that Kobayashi started his career with. Anyway, I digress. So he goes to boot camp. It turns out that he's actually quite the sharpshooter, even though he doesn't want to kill people, which strangely enough Kobayashi himself was apparently rather handy with a gun, despite the fact he didn't want anything to do with war or guns. But you can see that leadership of Kaji, even though he stays a private, he doesn't want to become an officer again, like Kobayashi. Kobayashi apparently was penciled, because kind of marked for being a good officer material, but he didn't want anything to do with that. So you can tell this is a film that the director is so engaged with, and that's why it's such a great film. We've all seen films where you can tell the director's not really that interested. It's a paycheck, essentially. But Kobayashi, as soon as he read the book, he responded to the book, and you can tell, Kaji is essentially Kobayashi, let's be honest. He goes through some of the things Kobayashi went through in Manchuria and in military service. So then we get the part where he's at war. So again, if you're watching The Human Condition and expecting a war film from the get-go, that's not what it is. It takes a while for him to actually get to war. And again, it's full of moral choices. There's a myriad of characters he crosses paths with. Some who are on his side, most who aren't on his side. He has to make terrible moral decisions. People die, obviously. It is a brutal film. It's a desolate film, but it's also a beautiful film. It's one of those beautiful, horrible films that I've talked about before. It's just so beautifully shot. This great silhouette work. It's weird, there's at times, maybe it's just me, but there's times that it's so beautifully shot, you start to see the film actually in colour, which obviously doesn't actually happen, but it just feels that way, especially the shots where you can tell they're at dusk, and you kind of imagine them at dusk. Maybe that's just me. So he's in war, decisions are made, people die, and then he ends up being caught by the Russians, and he ends up in a prisoner of war camp, which is similar to where the Chinese were in the mining company at the start of the film. Kobayashi himself was in a POW camp for a year at the end of the war. So again, this is Kobayashi totally in tune with the subject matter. And obviously I won't tell you how it ends. It's up to you to watch it. Obviously if it was made in America, perhaps it would be a different ending, but it probably would never be made in America. For years I've always held the belief that a Kurosawa film is the greatest Japanese film of all time. I won't name that film. But it's probably not Dodeska Den. But watching this film did make me think about a lot of things, including that. Again, I'm probably going to have to watch it a couple more times, and because I now know it is kind of a lot more easily digestible than you're going to have to sit for 9 hours and watch the film, I probably will. Well, I will watch it again, and looking forward to watching it again. When you think of how hard it is to make a 90-minute film be engaging and riveting with a character that you care about, with a character you want to survive, a 90-minute film that is beautifully shot, beautifully acted, that's hard to do. There's plenty of filmmakers who have never managed to do a 90-minute film that is engrossing and every scene works. So to make a film that's over 9 hours and make that work, you know, I'm a huge fan of Lawrence of Arabia. It's in my 150 favourite films list in the video series that it's got 2 parts left. But I recognise Lawrence of Arabia isn't perfect. You know, the second half of Lawrence of Arabia isn't as good as the first half, and that's like 4 hours. So for Kobayashi to make a film that's over 9 hours and to have it so jaw-droppingly good, it's mind-boggling to me. It's an astounding piece of work. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those films that masterpiece is probably actually an understatement. When every second film that comes out these days is a masterpiece, it's like, well, The Human Condition is an example of a proper masterpiece, with a monumental central performance by Nakadai. When you consider he was young, this was before he was a star. The fact that he wasn't really sure about taking the role himself, it's just astounding. I'm pretty embarrassed and ashamed that I hadn't actually watched it before, because it's pretty phenomenal. The extras on this, I would say, aren't great, but then with a film like this, the extras don't really need to be. There's an introduction by Philip Kemp who gives an overview of Kobayashi, which is very interesting, and Philip Kemp gives selected scene commentaries on all the parts, which is good. Perhaps being greedy, I wouldn't have minded just a commentary on the whole film, but I think Philip Kemp would probably be really tired after that. And obviously there's a lovely big booklet. The standard edition of this is still available, but there's just something very nice about this box. It feels monumental. It feels as monumental as the film. Yeah, the takeaway is war's terrible. Isms don't work. Again, you know, Kaji thinks socialism and communism, the Russians will treat people differently, but obviously when he gets to the prisoner of war camp, he sees that that's not really the case. As we all know, you know, when the Russian army got into Germany, they raped and killed like lots of people. No army comes out of a war covered in glory, and no army does the right thing and acts in a moral way, because that's not how war works. War is about debasement and destruction and horror, but we keep doing it. Yeah, the kind of summation of the human condition is we're all idiots, basically. And no matter what your beliefs are or what your morals are, war just destroys them and destroys lives, destroys people. Obviously in the case of, Come and See and Malik's Thin Red Line, destroys nature, destroys the planet. But war is one of the things that we're really good at. Killing each other and breeding is pretty much the only things we're good at. Wonderful. The human condition. Don't be like me. Don't be a fool like me. Go watch it immediately. Yeah, Nakadai is amazing. It looks beautiful. The concept of making a 9-hour film that is actually riveting and engrossing and works for its entire running time is, like I said before, mind-boggling. The kind of achievement that is. So thanks very much for watching. Please let me know if you've seen The Human Condition and what you think of it. And hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films. Apologising to Kobayashi because it took me so long to see it. Bidding you farewell.